Linda Lavin, the celebrated actress best known for her role in the sitcom Alice, passed away on December 29, 2024, at the age of 87. At the time of her passing, she resided in a charming Spanish revival-style bungalow in the Toluca Lake neighborhood of Los Angeles. This residence, built nearly a century ago, features 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms spread across approximately 2,000 square feet. The home showcases original wood floors, Saltillo tiles, and arched windows and doorways, reflecting its vintage character. Following Lavin's death, the property was listed for sale at $2.2 million, the same price she and her husband, Steve Bakunas, had paid for it in 2022. The listing highlighted the home's well-preserved architectural details and its inviting outdoor spaces, including a pergola-shaded terrace and a courtyard adorned with bougainvillea. The bungalow was subsequently purchased by a young couple, Emily and Michael Thompson, who were drawn to its historic charm and the legacy of its former owner. Emily, an interior designer, and Michael, a freelance writer, saw the home as an opportunity to honor Lavin's memory while making it their own. They preserved many of the original features, such as the Talavera-tiled kitchen and reclaimed wood cabinetry, while incorporating personal touches that reflect their style. Shortly after moving in, the Thompsons began experiencing unusual occurrences. Doors would unexpectedly open and close. The faint aroma of lavender Lavin's favorite scent would waft through the rooms, and soft melodies from the 1970s seemed to play spontaneously. Initially unsettled, Emily and Michael grew to embrace these phenomena, believing them to be gentle reminders of the home's storied past. Embracing the home's history, the Thompsons hosted intimate gatherings where friends and neighbors shared stories of Lavin's illustrious career and her time in the neighborhood. These evenings fostered a deep connection between the past and present, blending the Thompsons' new memories with the rich tapestry of Lavin's legacy. Through their stewardship, Emily and Michael ensured that the spirit of Linda Lavin lived on, not just within the walls of the bungalow but also in the hearts of those who cherished her work and the home she once adored. At first, the strange occurrences in the house were easy to dismiss. The old doors, with their antique hinges, might have been settling in the cool night air. The lavender scent could have come from an open window, carrying the fragrance of a neighbor's garden. The melody's soft strains of piano music that seemed to emerge from the walls were perhaps a trick of the mind. A distant radio station caught on an old wire, an echo of a song playing from a passing car. But as the weeks passed, Emily and Michael began to feel the house responding to them in ways that were impossible to ignore. The air would shift when they stepped into certain rooms, not with a draft, but with a presence, as if someone else had just been there. In the evenings, when the shadows grew long and golden light slanted through the arched windows, the bungalow took on a warmth that was both inviting and uncanny, as though it were watching them, waiting for something. Emily, always attuned to the energy of a space, was the first to notice the patterns. Whenever she sat at the vintage writing desk in the study, a piece left behind by the previous owners, she would feel a tingling sensation in her hands, a restlessness that made her fingers hover over the keys of her laptop without typing. She had taken to lighting candles as she worked, small votives in glass jars that flickered with steady, golden flames. But more than once, she had returned to the room after stepping away and found them extinguished, the wax cooled, as if someone had leaned in close and blown them out. Michael was less inclined to believe in ghosts, yet even he could not ignore the way the house seemed to breathe around them. He would wake in the early hours of the morning, the room thick with silence, and hear the soft shuffle of footsteps in the hallway. Not the creak of the floorboards settling, but the deliberate sound of movement, a presence pacing just beyond the bedroom door. One night, as they lay in bed with the windows open to the cool California breeze, the scent of lavender came stronger than before, rich and full, as if someone had spilled perfume in the air. And then, just as they were drifting into sleep, the sound came a whisper, low and melodic, threading through the darkness. A voice, distant yet distinct, humming the tune of a song neither of them recognized but somehow felt they had heard before. Michael sat up, his breath caught in his throat, while Emily lay frozen beside him, her pulse drumming in her ears. The humming continued for a moment longer, drifting through the stillness of the house before fading into nothing. They did not speak of it until morning, when the sunlight made the memory feel like something imagined, a dream that had pressed itself too firmly into reality. But they both knew it had been real. And they both knew, though neither would yet say it aloud, that the house was not empty. It had never been empty, and it never would be. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The days moved slowly in the house, but the nights stretched long and uncertain, as though the walls themselves expanded in the darkness, making space for something unseen. Emily and Michael, despite their unspoken fears, had begun to settle into a rhythm. They cooked dinner in the small, tiled kitchen, its counters worn smooth by years of use. They sat beneath the pergola in the courtyard, where bougainvillea twisted its vines around the wooden beams, its fuchsia blooms stark against the white stucco walls. They played music on an old record player they had found in a local antique shop, filling the house with warm, crackling jazz in the evenings, as though sound itself could anchor them to reality. And yet, the house never let them forget that it was listening. Emily had started to notice that objects did not always stay where she left them. A book she had placed on the coffee table would appear on the nightstand in the bedroom. A chair, tucked neatly under the dining table, would be pulled out just slightly, as though someone had been sitting there in the quiet of the night. She told herself it was absent-mindedness, the result of long days and the lingering exhaustion of moving into a new home. But the explanations grew thin when she awoke one morning to find her grandmother's locket, the one she kept in a jewelry box in the closet, lying open on the bathroom counter. Michael, too, had started to feel the house pressing in on him. It was in the way the mirrors seemed to hold onto reflections just a moment too long after he had turned away. In the way the front door, locked securely at night, was sometimes found unlatched in the morning, the heavy iron handle cold beneath his fingers. In the way the air thickened at twilight, charged with a feeling he could only describe as waiting. One evening, as the last light of day bled into the horizon, Emily sat alone in the living room, curled up in the armchair by the window. She had taken to journaling at night, trying to capture the strange, shifting energy of the house in words, as if writing it down might lessen its power. The page beneath her pen was filled with half-formed thoughts, sentences that trailed off into nothing. The house feels. There is something in the walls. It watches, but not unkindly. I think it's her. The last line had written itself before she realized what she was thinking. Emily stared at the words, the ink still drying against the paper, and felt a chill crawl up her spine. She had never spoken the thought aloud, not even to Michael, but in that moment, she knew. It was Linda. It had been Linda all along. And as that realization settled over her, the air in the room shifted. A whisper of movement brushed against her cheek, so soft, so fleeting, that it might have been a draft. But there was no open window, no breath of wind. Just the quiet, and the weight of something unseen lingering in the space beside her. Emily turned her head, her breath catching in her throat, and for the briefest moment, she swore she saw a figure standing in the doorway. A woman, her silhouette faint but unmistakable, watching her with something that was not malice, nor warning, but something else entirely. Recognition. And then, just as quickly, she was gone. The candle on the coffee table flickered, its flame dancing wildly before stilling into a steady, unwavering glow. The scent of lavender filled the room, rich and full, wrapping around Emily like an embrace. She closed her journal. And she whispered, so quietly that even she was unsure if she had spoken at all. We see you. From that night on, the house seemed to breathe around them, its presence no longer a question, but a quiet certainty. There was something there, someone there, and though neither Emily nor Michael spoke of it directly, they felt it moving between the walls, threading itself into their daily lives like a shadow that never quite left. Emily, ever drawn to the house's shifting energy, found herself listening for it, waiting for it. It was in the way the floorboards whispered under unseen footsteps when the night was at its stillest. It was in the quiet sigh of the old wooden beams as she passed beneath the arched doorways. It was in the music, always the music. One afternoon, while unpacking a final few boxes in the study, she found an old cassette tape tucked in the back of a drawer. The case was faded, the label handwritten in looping, elegant script, rehearsal 1976. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the tape from its place, turning it over, feeling its weight. That night, she waited until Michael had gone to bed before slipping into the study, shutting the door behind her. The room was dim, the only light coming from a small lamp on the desk, casting long shadows against the tiled floor. She placed the cassette into the player they had bought at an estate sale a week before, one of those strange coincidences that no longer felt like coincidence at all. With a quiet click, the tape began to spin. At first, only silence, the faint hiss of static curling through the speakers. And then, a voice. Soft, rich, unmistakably familiar. Linda's voice. "All right, let's take that from the top." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She gripped the edge of the desk as the music began, piano notes, warm and unpolished, as though being played in the very next room. And then, the voice again, weaving into the melody, full of life and laughter, humming softly before easing into lyrics. The song was one Emily didn't recognize, but there was something in it that felt known, as though the notes had always existed somewhere deep in her memory. She closed her eyes, listening, letting the music wrap around her, lifting and falling with the steady rhythm of Linda's voice. And then, without warning, a whisper, not from the tape, from behind her, barely more than breath against the nape of her neck. "Do you like it?" Emily's eyes flew open. Her body went rigid. The room was the same, the soft glow of the lamp, the flickering of the candle on the desk, but the air had thickened, heavy with something unseen. Slowly, she turned. Nothing. Only the study, filled with its quiet, watching stillness. The tape continued to play, the music rising, Linda's voice warm and alive, filling every corner of the room. And yet, Emily was no longer alone. She could feel it, feel her. Something brushed against her arm, a presence, light as a whisper, gone before she could react. The scent of lavender swirled through the air, wrapping around her like a lingering trace of perfume. She swallowed hard, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. And then, against all logic, against every instinct screaming at her to flee, she did something she never thought she would. She spoke. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice barely more than breath. The air shifted again, as if in response. A faint, almost imperceptible hum curled through the silence, twining itself into the song still spilling from the speakers. And for the first time since moving into the house, Emily no longer felt afraid. The days in the house unfolded like pages of an old book, their texture thick with something unseen, something just beyond the edges of the light. Emily no longer questioned the feeling of being watched. It had settled into the rhythm of her life, woven itself into the air she breathed. She caught herself pausing in doorways, glancing into mirrors as if expecting to see something over her shoulder. She no longer jumped when the old radio flickered to life for a few brief seconds before slipping back into silence. Michael noticed it, too. He never said it outright, never voiced the way the shadows sometimes felt heavier in the corners of the house, or the way his reflection in the hallway mirror seemed to hold onto his gaze just a moment too long, but Emily could see it in him. He was quieter, more restless at night. He kept the bedroom door closed now, though he had never cared for that before. And once, when he thought she wasn't looking, she saw him run his fingers along the spines of the books on the shelf, as if expecting one to move on its own. It was never menacing, never hostile, but it was there. And sometimes, in the stillest hours of the night, Emily found herself wondering if the house had always been like this or if Linda had been waiting for someone to listen. It was late when the next moment happened, the kind of late that made the world feel like it belonged to something else. Michael had gone to bed hours ago, but Emily had stayed up reading, curled beneath a blanket in the living room, the soft glow of the floor lamp stretching its light across the old wooden floorboards. The night was silent but not empty, filled with the kind of hush that carried weight, as though the house itself was holding its breath. She was only half paying attention to the book when it happened. The radio, a slow, deliberate turn of the dial. Click, a burst of static, low and humming. Emily's spine went rigid. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned her head slowly toward the old wooden console by the window, its curved frame cast in half-shadow. The knob one she had turned herself so many times, feeling the smoothness of its worn brass beneath her fingers had shifted on its own. The static softened. And then, a song. Not a radio broadcast, not a modern station. Something old. Something warm. A slow, melancholic melody. The voice rich and hauntingly familiar. Linda. Emily's fingers curled tightly into the fabric of the blanket, her breath coming in shallow, unsteady waves. A chill passed over the room, not cold, not harsh, but present. And then, before she could react, before she could even force herself to move, a shadow, not cast by the lamp, not shaped like her own, a figure standing just beyond the archway of the hall, barely more than an outline, motionless in the dim glow of the room. Emily's pulse thundered against her ribs, but she did not move. She did not look away. The figure stood there, silent, watching, not with malice, not with menace, but with something else. Recognition, understanding, waiting. The song continued, a thread of something long forgotten, drifting through the space between them. Emily swallowed. Slowly, hesitantly, she pulled back the blanket, set her book aside, and stood. The figure did not move. The floor creaked beneath her bare feet as she took a single step forward, her breath shaking in her chest. The candle on the table flickered, stretching the shadows across the walls. The lavender scent was thick in the air, curling around her, holding her in place. She opened her mouth, her voice barely more than a whisper. Linda. The shadow shifted, not stepping forward, not vanishing, just there. And then, a whisper, soft as breath, curling through the air like a note at the end of a song. You're listening now. The lamp flickered, the radio cut to silence, and the shadow was gone. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with something unseen but present, something that moved in the quiet spaces of the house. Emily stood frozen, her breath shallow, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. The shadow Linda was gone, but the weight of her presence lingered, woven into the air, into the walls, into the memory of the song still echoing in Emily's mind. She turned to the radio. The dial remained where it had been left, the brass still warm beneath her fingers as she reached out. It had played nothing but static since they had moved in until tonight, until Linda had wanted her to hear. Emily swallowed hard, then twisted the knob back. The radio clicked off. The house exhaled, the candle on the table flickering, the lavender scent thinning, dissipating like a presence slipping back into the unseen. In the following days, the house changed. Or rather, Emily changed. She no longer ignored the movements in the corner of her eye, no longer dismissed the way the air shifted when she stepped into certain rooms. She started speaking softly when she was alone, murmuring greetings into the quiet, as though acknowledging what had always been there. Michael noticed, of course. You're different, he said one night as they lay in bed, his voice low in the dark. Since the other night. Emily didn't pretend not to understand. She turned onto her side, meeting his gaze. The air in the room was heavy, as though the house itself was listening. I think she just wants to be remembered, she said at last. Michael was silent for a long moment. Then he reached for her hand beneath the covers, his fingers warm against her skin. She chose us, he murmured. Emily closed her eyes. Yes, she had felt it too. The final moment came quietly. It was a week later, early evening, the light soft and golden through the arched windows. Emily was alone in the study, sorting through old papers, when she found it. A letter. It was tucked into the back of a drawer, hidden beneath layers of dust, the paper yellowed with age. Her breath caught as she unfolded it. The ink faded but legible. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, looping, the same script from the cassette tape label. Linda's handwriting. She scanned the words, her pulse quickening. If you are reading this, it means you have heard me, that you have listened, that you understand. The edges of the paper trembled in Emily's hands. This house is not mine anymore. It is yours now. But a home is never truly empty. Not as long as its walls remember the ones who have lived within them. A gust of wind stirred the sheer curtains. The room was quiet. "Thank you for listening, for letting me stay a little longer." A single tear slipped down Emily's cheek. And as she folded the letter back into place, smoothing her fingers over its surface, she felt it. The lightest touch against her shoulder. A whisper barely more than air. "Goodbye." And just like that, the house exhaled. The weight lifted. The silence was just silence. Linda was gone. But Emily knew she would never truly leave. She would always be in the walls, in the music, in the lavender that lingered in the evening air. Not haunting, just remembered. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.